the multiverse. It's practically unescapable. In 2022, the multiverse seems to be all the craze in films, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe milking the concept at every moment they can, and the DC Cinematic Extended Universe doing absolutely nothing interesting with it. But hey, they're still using the theory, so it warrants a mention. The basic understanding of the multiverse theory is multiple different universes that exist outside of each other, each one being a parallel state of the last. Parallel universes can be drastically different or have an extremely minor detail that is out of place that could change the entire course of other universes' history. One other thing that will always be unescapable by its very nature is, well, music. In one way or another, we all listen to music. For some of us, music is a big thing that even gets us through the days. But what happens when these two ideas converge? Well, in one universe, there is supposedly a differing outcome on the iconic band The Beatles and their breakup in 1970. A universe in which the Beatles would come together, take one last trip down Abbey Road, and release their 13th and final album. As we all know, the Beatles are one of, if not the most famous music act of all time, and for just under 10 years, they ruled the music world, making some of the world's most iconic songs of all time. With that being said, for an act as famous as them, just under 10 years does seem pretty short, doesn't it? Before we get into this crazy theory, I figured it would be important to quickly mention why the Beatles suddenly broke up so quickly anyways. And even here, there are a few different reasons circulating around behind why they truly did. The most commonly cited reason for why the band broke up was due to their manager Brian Epstein dying in 1967. After this, the band needed to find a new manager, which created a rift when different members wanted a different manager. Lennon, Harrison, and Starr wanted Alan Klein, manager of the Rolling Stones, to take over, but Paul McCartney wanted Lee and John Eastman, the father and brother of his soon-to-be wife Linda. There was also some financial concerns, so much so that even a few songs were made about it, most notably being You Never Give Me Your Money, on none other than Abbey Road. In short, these reasons left a power vacuum within the band that created conflict. There are other prominent theories out there behind why the band broke up, such as Yoko Ono, the then girlfriend of Lennon, showing up during sessions to be the true reason they broke up. But a theory such as this definitely seems a little far-fetched to me. Many people say that they broke up due to Lennon and McCartney just growing apart. Lennon really wanted to make more introspective experimental songs, while McCartney had a very simple songwriting style, which also formed a rift. Truthfully, it was probably both of these main points combined, even sprinkled in with some other things we aren't even that aware of. Whatever the case, it is important to understand these circumstances when going into a mystery such as this. And speaking of, let's get right into it. It's time to enter a different reality where none of this ever happened. The Beatles continued on and released one final album, reinforcing their legacy. This is the bizarre story of the Beatles album from another dimension. On September 9th, 2009, James Richards was driving home from his friend's house in Turlock, California with his dog. His dog inevitably needed to use the restroom, taking that moment to park his car, stretch, and let his dog out. The dog spotted a rabbit and did what dogs do and chased it. Richards noticed the chase and joined in on it, running as fast as possible and falling over uneven patches of land. Eventually, one of these patches was an actual rabbit hole. His foot landed in it and he was immediately unconscious. He woke to find himself in a strange world with a terribly late rabbit and a mad tea party. No, actually he woke up in a room with a bandage on his head. Richards noted that he had fallen in an area that wasn't heavily populated, but he heard traffic outside. A man eventually entered the room, a 6-foot man with a nice but quote-unquote greasy look. Richards' dog also came running through the door as it was opened. The man's name was Jonas, and there was a strange machine in the room. Jonas explained the insane way he found Richards unconscious and decided to help by transporting the both of them to a parallel Earth. Jonas explained the term parallel universe to Richards with some help from YouTube, which is great to know that a version of Debunk file possibly exists in a different dimension. The two exchanged in multiple conversations about the different dimensions that Jonas had traveled to, and how similar or different they all truly were. Eventually the topic of music came up, and the Beatles popped into the conversation. Jonas told Richards how his brother just got back from one of their concerts, which would have been impossible in our world in 2009, as they were broken up for over 30 years, and 2 of the members had passed away. Nevertheless, in this universe, all the Beatles were still alive and well, and still touring the world. Jonas showed Richards his collection of Beatles cassettes. CDs never caught on in this dimension. Jonas put on one of the tapes, which was unofficial. Richards was blown away at the 13th album and wanted a copy, but Jonas was extremely stern that Richards wasn't allowed to take a single souvenir from this dimension. When someone came to the door, Jonas answered and Richards stole the tape. The 2 went out to eat and had some purple ketchup on the side. Richards finally shook Jonas's hand and thanked him for the insight and help, and that was it. Richards found himself back in our world with his car still sitting exactly where he left it. When Richards got back, he posted the album Everyday Chemistry for all to hear on his blog, thebeatlesneverbroakeup.com, which is also where he posted the entire story of how he came into possession of the album. The album is actually really solid and sounds like something the Beatles could have possibly made in the years following 1970. It has that surreal, almost trippy feeling a lot of rock had during the years of the Vietnam War. The surrealism could also come from the fact that this album isn't from this world, and we shouldn't really even have it, but let's be real here. What is this album really? An 11-track album, it is a full-fledged musical foray and doesn't skimp on the Beatles-ness of it all. Look, as fun as it is to have an album from another dimension from such an important band, it isn't realistic, and after first impressions, the cracks start to show. Starting with James Richards himself. His name is a pseudonym of the 2 surviving Beatles members, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, whose legal names happen to be James Paul McCartney and Richard Starkey. Whatever the case, it is interesting that he goes to such lengths to hide any possible information about himself, as even his email address can only be traced back to the headquarters of a Yahoo.com subsidiary. Of course, anybody on the internet has the right to try and remain anonymous, but with the details that he's trying to share, it certainly comes off as pretty suspicious that we are purposely unable to find any information behind the man in question. One thing that really stands out is some of the pictures that were provided by Richards. The most notable of which is an actual photo of the cassette that was stolen from the alternate dimension, as well as pictures of the area that Richards took his faithful fall into the wrong plane. The cassette looks about average, but average isn't good enough for us. Upon closer inspection, it's a General Electric branded tape with 60 minutes of audio time, and looking that up gives us absolutely nothing. It seems to be impossible to find an exact copy of this specific tape design. The only results yielded are pictures of the Everyday Chemistry tape. I've searched high and low and to no avail. This specific branded cassette genuinely seems like it could have come from a different dimension. But of course, it is very likely that the sticker on the tape was just made by Richards himself. Richards seems to really stick with his story and the lore surrounding this album, so it's not completely unlikely he would have gone the extra mile to make the tape look out of the ordinary. Something else that makes the story fall apart even more, just in case it was somehow still believable, goes back to the aforementioned breakup of this band. It was said that when he went to this parallel universe in 2009, all of the Beatles were still together and still performing, which raises a ton of questions. For the Beatles to have never broken up, did their manager just not die? Were they somehow able to find their replacement without any friction like in our world? And of course, this would also mean that in this universe, John Lennon and George Harrison escaped death completely, basically meaning that literally everything possible lined up perfectly. Of course, this is a supposed alternate reality, so unfortunately in that sense, you can say just about anything, but it all certainly seems a little ridiculous and unrealistic. Speaking of that year, 2009, something else that is interesting to mention is that 2009 was a really significant year for Beatles fans, which seems to make the idea of somebody making a mashup album at this time specifically even more possible, rather than it actually being from an alternate dimension. In 2009, Apple obtained the rights to the Beatles' music digitally, at a time when streaming music was really beginning to become popular. Since it was such a new concept, there were a few bands that were pretty hesitant towards this idea of their music being available to be sold online, and the Beatles were one of them. So when Apple finally gained these rights to do that, as well as release remasters of previously made music that had never been heard before, the Beatles really surged in popularity once more, and this was naturally the perfect time for people to make mashups. The songs on the album, as previously mentioned, sound really solid. It absolutely could be a Beatles album from the early 70s, and yes, all the Beatles are present, performing on every track just as they did back in the day. The songs do sound a little too good. Each song is an incredible blend of John, Paul, George, and Ringo's solo career albums. For example, the first track, Four Guys, uses Band on the Run by Paul McCartney as its hook. And I've gotta say, as a small Beatles fan, I've honestly kept this track on repeat while researching for this video. The artistry behind this is beyond brilliant. But of course, there is something else that doesn't quite line up here too. With this being a new album from a different dimension, does it really sound right that there would be 0 actual new songs that we have never heard before on it? Because this album is, as explained, all remixes of either existing Beatles songs or mashups that include music from some of these members' solo careers. The logic behind this seems to be the thought that if they never broke up, they would likely just be making the songs together that they instead wound up making by themselves. This is entirely possible, but the idea that they didn't make a single new song at all is sort of ridiculous. The overall fact that all of these pieces of music already exist in our dimension and were just patched and stitched together proves beyond a shadow of the doubt that this was just a fan-made mashup after all. Yes, believe it or not, James Richards didn't actually travel to another dimension, but that doesn't mean he still didn't do something great. The mysterious James Richards has really delivered something special here. Not just by being a really cohesive concept compilation type album, but the meticulous backstory crafted by him as well adds so much to this project. Truthfully, when I look at his site, I'm not even sure if it was ever made with the intention of getting the types of reactions that it wound up getting. That is not to say that I don't think it was made with the intent to get a reaction, because of course it was, but I'm not sure if it was made to be taken as seriously as some people have wound up taking it. When I looked online to find accounts of people that knew of this phenomenon, I saw people very annoyed by the site, people that saw it as an obnoxious way to promote a mashup, and people that were annoyed that the site even was claiming that these events mentioned were real. To me, I just don't see it that way. Mashups are very common, and they can be great. They can be used as an excuse to essentially solve what-if questions, or see artists in a different, new light. Like, what if Jay-Z collabed with Linkin Park? Well, thanks to that famous mashup album, now we may know what something like that would have sounded like. But if anything, this album takes that idea even further, not just by giving you a what-if, but by giving you an entire concept to think about. This is an incredible love letter to the Beatles from a really talented and patient artist or artists who took a little something from everything to create the Beatles album from another dimension. If you enjoy the Beatles even a little bit, or are a fan of 70s rock in general, I highly recommend checking this out on James Richards' blog, and it is easily accessible all over the internet. This mashup truly shows the love of music and respecting its past as well as creating something new. In the meantime, it's essentially just an album full of different samples, but at the end of the day, art is art, no matter what dimension it comes from. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. If you like the channel, make sure to check out our social medias in the description below. Make sure to stop by our Discord, it's the best place to chat with us and hang out with fellow debunk enthusiasts. Of course, if you'd like to support the channel, please head on over to our Patreon Debunk Plus. Only $1 a month and you guys get access to videos early, script PDFs, whatever random stuff we decide to put up, and more. As always, my name is Sep from Debunk File. See you guys next time. Bye.